Welcome to Introduction to Land Use Management. Please be advised that this lesson will be conducted in two parts. So after listening to this first part, you will be required to proceed to part 2 to complete today's lesson. Let's first talk about the reasons or the motivations behind the need for land use management. As you're all aware, the Earth's population has been growing exponentially over the past 100 years or so. Trinidad and Tobago is no different. So we experience many of the same challenges with regards to land use management as many other parts of the world. So as our populations grow, we find that there is a great or rather increased need for food, water, fuel, shelter, employment, and many other resources. And as a result, this growing need puts additional strain on our land resources, our available land resources, which is finite. For example, we find there's a growing demand for arable land in order to produce our crops, our food. There is a need for land for grazing of animals and animal farming, forestry, wildlife, need for land for tourism and urban development, because as our populations continue to grow, we find cities would grow, we find there's greater need for housing, etc. Additionally, we find that with this growing demand on the land, we find that our land is being degraded at an exponential rate, and this is happening as a result of unwise use of the land. For example, you find some of the things that are happening is we find clearance of forests taking place on our hillsides. We find activities such as poor land use farming practices being carried out not only on our hillsides but in areas where we have poor soils or soils that are unsuitable for certain types of farming activities. And as a result, we find our soils are now being depleted. We find overgrazing of pastures where there's animal farming occurring. We find other types of problems occurring where industrial, agricultural, and urban activities, as they increase, they begin to produce more and more pollution that affects every sphere of our natural environment. And at the end of the day, we know that it all comes back to us, the human being. We are all eventually affected. With all of this happening in our environment, we find that there is an increasing need for information. Information, for example, not only about our environmental conditions and our environmental circumstances and challenges, but we need socio-economic information as well. You would find that land use planners would require a host of information, because when the land is developed, the land is being developed for a particular purpose. There are human needs, there are social needs, there are economic needs. But then the environmental challenges must be recognized and must be respected. So holistic information is required. And once this information is available, you would find that this information now needs to go through a lot of comprehensive analyses in order for our land use planners to have an understanding first of the situation, and out of that be able to make wise land use planning choices. How do we achieve successful land use planning? Firstly, people need to accept that there is a need for changes in land use, changes in the way we do things, changes in the way we utilize the land, manage the land. And many times you find this would include a need for mitigation measures. For example, if you have farming practices that are unwise in a particular area and it seems to be degrading your environment, farmers need to be prepared to make changes to improve that situation. So attitudes need to be changed, a willingness to be open, a willingness to learn and understand is critical to successful land use planning. There is also a great need for the political will to implement these plans once they are presented. There is no shortage of knowledge or technical capacity in a place like Trinidad, but sometimes plans can be stymied from the very top, where those who make the decisions are not willing to listen, they're not willing to understand, and sometimes they have their own personal or political agendas. So it's critical that there is political will available to move forward for the greater well-being of a nation. And this would occur firstly at the legal level, so there must be relevant laws put in place. We must also make sure that there is the technical capacity at the various implementing agencies available, and also there must be manpower. I'm sure many of you have often heard of different agencies across Trinidad and Tobago where they would complain they don't have the manpower necessary to implement laws and plans out there, and this often makes it very difficult for any country or any jurisdiction to move forward with successful land use plans. Additionally, it is important that all relevant information that is available be integrated and be available to all the necessary agencies involved. Some of the types of information that would be important in land use planning would be suitability of land. For example, what are the characteristics of the land? What types of activities would it be suitable for? Would it be suitable for agriculture? If so, what types of agricultural activities? Would it be suitable for urban development, etc.? Additionally, information that contains the demands for particular, for alternative products or uses. For example, an alternative would be, okay, if choice one or if the proposed choice is not feasible, what are the alternatives? The opportunities for satisfying those demands on the available land. Is it, first of all, is the land available? Who owns the land? If it's privately owned, is it accessible by the government for proposed land use development? What does the future options look like, etc.? And this is another challenge we often face in Trinidad and Tobago, is the fact that even if information is there, some agencies may possess some of these information, but other agencies involved in different aspects of land use planning may not have access to the same information. So integration of this type of information within the Trinidad and Tobago context is often very difficult to come by. Now let us look at the three major levels of land use planning. Now this is a general classification, but it applies in all jurisdictions within the discipline of land use planning. So these three levels are at the national level, the district level, and the local level. And it is critical that there is interaction and communication amongst all three levels in order to ensure good land use planning. We will look at each of these levels very briefly. For example, level 1, the national level responsibilities. So this is what takes place usually at government level. At this level, this is where the government would be responsible for developing national policies that would drive the way in which land is used within our national borders. What are our priorities? Which sectors of the economy would have preference over others? It depends on the national agenda. So our national development plans and budgets developed as a result of national policies will often dictate the way in which our land resources are allocated to the different sectors of the society. Coordination of sectoral agencies across Trinidad and Tobago would be managed by the central government as well. And these are various agencies that are responsible for managing, implementing, and controlling land use management across the nation. At a national level, legislation would also be developed and implemented. Some of these legislation would include addressing issues like land tenure, which addresses land ownership. And in Trinidad and Tobago, this is very critical because we have a major problem where we have a situation what we call insecure land tenure, where many people would be living on lands but their ownership rights have not been clearly established. And I'm not only talking about squatters, I'm talking about situations where there is family land, that a family may have owned this land for generations, but many of the later generations, they still do not have clear ownership of the land. Other types of legislation would address rights regarding water, the right to clear certain portions of forests, etc. At the level 2, we have the district responsibilities, or in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, for example, this would be constituency level. At the constituency level, we have decisions being made regarding the choice of sites to establish new developments, settlements, to determine where forest plantations can occur, where irrigation schemes can be developed. Additionally, at this level, they would make decisions as to what types of modifications to the developments can occur. At the district level, they also address the need for improved infrastructure where necessary. For example, water supply, where the water supply needs to be expanded or improved, road networks, marketing facilities. These are decisions made at the district level. Additionally, they would also make development of management guidelines would be developed or established at this level for improved kinds of land use in each type of land. So what you would find is many times you find the challenges of a land use planner is not only to determine appropriate land use for new land use developments, but also to look at existing land use developments and try to determine the best ways to improve and make it more efficient and more sustainable. Level 3, these are local responsibilities. So we are down to the village level now, or the towns, or the specific cities. And at this level, this is where the land use plans are directly implemented. These are the people who will actually carry out the implementation of the plans. Some of the things you find they would have to do is they will have to determine the layout for new or improved drainage, irrigation, determine the best places for soil conservation work, because they know the area, they have the information, they know the community, they understand what the people want, what they need. They can also determine what the design of certain infrastructure should look like. And also they are able to determine where is the best place to develop certain types of agriculture, certain types of crops, because they will understand the details of the soil, of the environment. Okay, here we have a summary table of some of the major pieces of legislation or laws in Trinidad and Tobago that can affect land use planning. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I just want to highlight a few major ones. The lesson will also be available for you for download so that you can take your time and go through it. So in the left column, we have the name of the legislation. In the right column, we have the summary. So I just want to highlight for you, hopefully you can see my cursor. there is a Town and Country Planning Ordinance of 1960, proclaimed in 1969. This is a major piece of legislation that governs the development of lands in both rural and urban areas of Trinidad and Tobago, and also to improve and preserve amenities. So it's important that you understand that when we talk about development of land, we are not only talking about putting up buildings. Any kind of development or any kind of activity that can change the face of the land would be considered development. And Town and Country Planning Act addresses this. Additionally, we also have the Registration of Land Title Act of 2000. And this legislation deals with the ownership issues, such as proof of ownership and land transactions. So remember in the previous slide, one of the previous slides, I mentioned that we have a lot of issues in Trinidad and Tobago with land ownership. So this is one of the pieces of legislation that would play an important role here in terms of trying to settle and resolve issues with regards to ownership. Additionally, we have the Land Tribunal Act, and this one really has to do with addressing issues of appeals and decisions regarding land adjudication. So this act works in conjunction with the Land Adjudication Act, and again this has to do with land conflicts. So we have many different types of pieces of legislation that play an important role in the land use planning process in Trinidad. So I would like each of you to take some time just to become familiar with some of these pieces of legislation. In addition to the legislations, we have land institution or land agencies in Trinidad and Tobago, some of which have been established as a result of some of those pieces of legislation we just looked at. For example, again here we have the Town and Country Planning Division. And just as the Act says, this agency is responsible for development planning and control. So they are not only a matter of determining best types of activity to take place in certain types of land, but also to control the development, ensure that the appropriate development is taking place. Lands and Surveys Division, as a result of the Lands and Surveys Act, here you would find that there are many maps and survey controls available to guide land use planning, and many times you find these documents would also be legal documents that can be used in land use conflict adjudication. There is also the Valuations Division, which is under the Ministry of Finance, and this act is responsible for making the valuation of every parcel of land throughout Trinidad and Tobago. So they determine the dollar value of the land. The EMA also has an important role to play in land use management, and their role is to ensure that the ecological activities that are being proposed for the land, it's being done wisely in an environmentally conscious and environmentally responsible manner. And then we also have the Land Administration Division of the Ministry of Agriculture, which is responsible for the management of all state lands, specifically for the purpose of agricultural activity. So this brings us to the end of part 1 of our lesson. You are asked to now please proceed to part 2 of this lecture.